All right, it is time. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. So, good evening and welcome to our February National Virtual Gathering. We meet here on the first Wednesday of every month for a special guest speaker to present to our ladies at the national level. You can always catch the live stream here, ask questions, and then we post these live streams to our YouTube channel 2 weeks later. And the YouTube channel sign is at nlhg.org. So I encourage you to go over there and check it out. We have, I think, over 50 different presentations on there now, and it's a really valuable resource. So the National Ladies Homestead Gathering is a national nonprofit where women share and celebrate all things homesteading. So whether you're just raising chickens in the backyard, you have a full ranch, or you're growing tomatoes on your balcony, you have a place here with us. So I just like to encourage you to visit our online community. We have 24 chapters, and we are sharing everything in our national community and at the chapter level every week. So if you're interested, you could go to www.nlhg.org and join. It is absolutely free. So the purpose of the National Ladies Homestead Gathering is to empower women through homesteading. And our mission is to share knowledge, build community, and grow friendships. So my name is Nancy. I am your host and the media director for the National Ladies Homestead Gathering. And I am so glad to have you all here tonight. A quick announcement about our VIP sponsor spotlight for February. This month's sponsor is Mother Earth News, and they are offering a discount on their print and digital membership. Some of the benefits are online video learning library featuring 450 plus videos and more added every month, admission to all the online video workshops, including expert interviews, live Q&As, every member discounts on eco-friendly products in the Mother Earth News store, and so on. There's a lot there. So if you want to find out more information, head over to nlhg.org. Our VIP members get $10 off the annual subscription, which takes it from $39.95 to $29.95. And all the details are in our VIP vault under the tab of member discounts. So you can support NLHG and enjoy all these exclusive discounts and additional resources for just $35 a year. And more information on the VIP membership can also be found on our website. So before I bring Robyn in and we start the presentation, I want to go over just a couple things. Please post your questions in the chat, and we will pull from those questions throughout her presentation. And then at the end of the presentation, we will have a live Q&A with Robyn. So I am going to bring Robyn in here. Bear with me just a second. Robyn is joining us from British Columbia, Canada.
Sorry.
You're good. Hi, Robyn.
Hi, thank you guys for having me. I'm excited.
Well, thank you so much for joining us and being willing to present. And I got the chance to listen to your talk at the Modern Homestead Conference here in North Idaho over the summer. And you presented on cheesemaking. And I picked up your amazing book. I mean, I am so excited to listen to your presentation again and then take everything that I learned from the Homestead Conference from tonight. And I just can't go on about how well organized the book is, and it's really beginner friendly. And so I'm excited to hear you talk about it.
You. Thank you.
So, yeah. So before we jump into your presentation, I have 2 questions I would like to ask. And so the first is, what does homesteading mean to you personally, and how has it shaped your everyday life?
Ooh, good question. I think it personally means growing food for my family and being able to know what the food has in it that I'm making and growing for my family, and how it shaped our daily life is that it's really it's everything we do. You know, if you're anyone that has dairy cows knows that they really are kind of the pillars that you work your life around. And so that certainly has been something that has really shaped our homestead life.
And you have how many head of cattle or steers do you have? Dairy cows?
We have 2 dairy cows, and then we have also a beef ranch. So we have 250 cows too. So we have a lot of cows going on. But the dairy cows, they take all the time. Like the beef cows, like they take a little bit of time, but not like the dairy cows.
Yeah, because I saw on your Instagram channel you were getting ready to have a bunch of cows come in and showing your barn, and just a lot going on up there for sure.
Yeah, it definitely is. Yeah, calving season is going to start pretty soon, and that is kind of full on. But right now, it's kind of the resting period before the storm. So,
yeah. All right, second question, and then we'll let you get started. What's the very first cheese you think every beginner should try, and why?
Ooh, I have so many. But I was thinking about this actually. I think that everybody should at least try like a sweet ricotta, which is made by just warming milk up and adding a vinegar or a lemon juice or citric acid into it. And then it just turns into cheese, and it's so easy. You don't need any fancy ingredients. You can use the milk that you have available to you. So that's like a really amazingly simple cheese to be able to make. And then there's some other like beginner cheeses if you want to go out and get the ingredients. Like feta cheese is a great beginner cheese, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in the presentation. But I think ricotta is just like one where you do it and you kind of blow your mind about how easy that is, and you can just make this like every week for your family. And that would be, if you did nothing else, that would be so cool if you could do that.
Okay, I'm gonna have to give that one a try for sure.
Yeah, it was so easy.
Well, if you want to go ahead and share your screen, I'm gonna unshare mine and mute myself, and I'll just pop on real quick and give you about a 5-minute warning when we're getting ready to wrap it up and have time for the Q&A.
Perfect, sounds good. All right, bear with me, guys. Sharing my screen here. All right, you guys can all see that, I presume. Maybe just pop in the chat if you can't see it. All right.
I can see it.
So
yep,
you can see it. Perfect. Thank you, Nancy. All right. So beginner cheese making is what my presentation is going to be on tonight. And I'm excited to talk about beginner cheese making because I can remember sitting here as a beginner and looking in on the hobby or the skill of cheese making and feeling really overwhelmed and really confused. So my goal with today's presentation is to really take you guys through the ingredients that you need to get started, some of the equipment that you can use for cheese making, and honestly, you probably already have all of the equipment that you need to make cheese in your kitchen or to make some beginner cheeses. And I also want to talk to you a little bit about the how and why of cheese making. And then by the end of the presentation, I want to show you some sources of recipes and talk to you a little bit about some good beginner cheeses, kind of like I've already talked about, just so that you can leave this presentation and feel confident to go out and get started making cheese. You know, if you wanted, you can make cheese tomorrow. That's my goal for this presentation. Oh, I might have to switch to the next. 1 second. Bear with me while I switch my slides here. All right. So I like to start off all my presentations with highlighting the fact that cheese making is a natural process. And the reason that I like to highlight that is because cheese making can be kind of overwhelming. It can be kind of confusing at times. But remembering that at its root, it is a natural process can be something that is really encouraging to people. So in nature, young ruminants, whether it's goat kids or calves or lambs, they depend on cheese making for their survival. I'm going to use the example of a little calf. So a little calf is going to drink the milk from its mother's udder. That milk is going to be warm, and it's going to go into that little calf's stomach where it's also warm, it's acidic, and there's enzymes in the lining of that calf's stomach. Now, all of these things are going to combine to cause that milk to go from its liquid form to its solid form or its cheese form. And the little calf needs to be able to do this to slow down the digestion of the milk. If it couldn't turn its mother's milk into cheese, it would just shoot right through it, and it would never be able to fully digest all of those nutrients that it has to offer. So that little calf depends on cheese making for its survival. And as cheesemakers, we can follow this natural path to get us started with our cheeses. So even though there's thousands of different cheeses in the world, you're going to find that almost all of them are going to start by mimicking this natural path very, very closely. So the first thing in most cheese making recipes that we're going to do is warm our milk back up to a similar temperature that it was when it came out of the cow's udder. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to create an acidic environment, just like that little calf's stomach. And we do this usually utilizing fermentation. And I'll speak to that a little bit more as we get deeper into the presentation. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to add in an enzyme, that very same enzyme that lives in the lining of that calf's stomach. We call it rennet. And then we are going to let our pot sit for about an hour. We're going to come back and we're going to have a coagulated curd mass. We can then take that coagulated curd mass and we can take it in all sorts of different directions to help us make different types of cheeses. But no matter what cheese you're making, it's going to start very, very similar. Just get my next slide here. All right, so as I said, most cheeses are going to start very, very similar. And they also are going to start with the same ingredients. So even though there's thousands of different cheeses, these are going to be your 4 main pillar ingredients. So there's going to be some variation, but these are mostly the ingredients you're going to need. So milk, bacterial starter culture, and we'll speak more to this as we go through the presentation, rennet, and salt. So all of the different cheeses made from those 4 different ingredients, which I think is very, very cool. All right, so the first one I want to talk about is milk. So milk is known under one name, milk, but it is anything but simple. There's all sorts of different milks that you can use for cheese making, from different species like sheep milk or goat's milk or cow's milk, to different types of milk. For example, you can have raw milk, you can have pasteurized milk, there's even ultra pasteurized milk. So we're going to speak a little bit to what type of milk you want to use for your cheese making. So milk is a product that is comprised primarily of water. It's about 87.5% water. And then the rest of that 12.5% is going to be made up of proteins, which are going to be the building blocks of your cheese, fat, which we know as butterfat, what you would make butter out of, lactose, which is the sugar in the milk. And I like to think of it as the bacteria food that's going to help us with fermentation, and then minerals. So that is kind of the basic composition of milk. Now, within milk, when we're looking at it as cheese making, we're going to see that there's 2 different categories of proteins. The ones that we're dealing with for cheese making are going to be called casein proteins. And then you're going to have some proteins left behind in the whey after cheese making. That's the kind of the water that is left behind after you've extracted these casein proteins. And there's going to be a little bit of whey proteins left in the whey after you're done cheese making. But for the most part, we're mostly dealing with these casein proteins when we make cheese. There are our building blocks of the cheese. So just to get a little fancier, you don't have to get fancy at all. Just know that most milk will make cheese. So if you have a good milk source, you probably don't even have to worry about any of this stuff. But for the people that do raise their own milk cows or are thinking about getting milk cows with the purpose of making cheese, I like to mention that you can breed for cows that are going to be better in the cheese making department. For example, for my cows, I specifically bred for a type of casein protein in their milk called kappa casein BB, and this gives me higher yields as well as quicker coagulation with my milk. So not all milk is the same. Other things such as diet, season, breed, health, and also the individuality of the animal are also going to play a significant part in how milk reacts during cheese making. Sorry. All right, so far, I'm kind of talking about raw milk. And one thing that I forgot to say on the last slide is that aside from all of those other pieces of the composition of milk, that protein, that fat, that lactose, within raw milk, so milk that is fresh from the animal and has not been processed or pasteurized at any level, it is a living ecology. So there's all sorts of bacteria and fungus within that milk that is also present within it. So I have some rules for sourcing milk for cheese making, specifically sourcing raw milk for cheese making, that really helped me to be able to make better cheese. My first rule on the list is that milk should always come from a healthy animal. So you are what you eat, and this is no different with milk and with cheese. So milk really is the mother to cheese. So we can't expect to make good cheese if we don't have good milk. And it really is the most important ingredient. If we took away all of the other ingredients, we would still be able to make some type of cheese. So really prioritizing health and good quality milk is going to make a world of difference for us. The milk should always be handled appropriately. So milk is the perfect host for growing bacteria. That's why it makes such good cheese. So we want to make sure that it's growing the right kind of bacteria. We don't want it to have an opportunity to pick up bacteria from the barn or from the environments that it's stored in. So we want to be making sure that it's handled in a safe way. This is one that surprises people. I don't make aged cheese with milk that is older than 2 days. So I've come to this rule for myself after many years of cheese making. So I used to make cheese with milk that was 3, 4, 5, even 6 days old. And I still made some good cheeses. Like I had some good success, but I also had some cheeses that didn't quite turn out. And this has been the biggest needle mover for me in making better cheeses, is moving to using fresher milk. And the reason for that is because raw milk is this living ecology. It has all of these different bacteria and fungus in it. And just because we take that milk and we put it in the refrigerator, it doesn't mean that it stops living. It's still going to be feeding all of those different bacteria. And the problem is that these bacteria that are feeding within it, they like to eat the same food that our bacterial starter cultures for cheese making like to eat. So when we go to use that milk for cheese making, not only is there less food, but there's also more competition. And so it adds more variables into us being able to make good cheese. So we have more control over the cheeses that we're going to be making if we use fresher milk. I like to use milk that is actually still warm from the udder. I know this is absolutely not attainable for a lot of people that don't have a dairy animal, but if you do have a dairy animal, I really encourage you to try and make milk with that warm, fresh milk from the udder. And another reason for that, aside from, it's going to be easier to turn into cheese, is also that once that cream separates, so anybody that's ever had raw milk knows that the cream is going to rise to the top of the milk after it sits for a time. Well, that's a reaction that occurs, and it changes how the cream is going to be able to be swept up within the cheese. So you're going to have a lot better luck sweeping up that cream when that reaction hasn't occurred, when that cream hasn't had a chance to already rise. So if you do not have the option of using warm, fresh milk from the udder, you absolutely can use milk that has already cream lined. Just know that you're probably going to see a lot of cream left behind in the way. And one thing you can actually do with that is you can let your pot of whey sit out for about 12 hours after you've made cheese, and you'll see all that cream rise to the top of the whey, and you can skim it off and have it for cultured cream. So that's one way that you could rescue that cream so that it's not just going to go to waste. And then if you don't have a dairy animal, you can source raw milk from, I'm very jealous about this being Canadian, but you guys have this really cool website called realmilk.com. So you can go on there and they've got like a map and it links you with farmers or people that are selling raw milk. So you can go on there and have a peek. If you're from Canada, I don't know if anybody on here would be from Canada, but there's also a Facebook page for every province that helps farmers link to people that are looking for raw milk. If you are sourcing raw milk off of your farm, never be afraid to ask questions. Ask questions about the handling of the milk, the health of the animals, the animal husbandry. I encourage you to ask these questions because, as I said, you are what you eat, and having that good quality milk is going to make the world of a difference in the cheeses that you're able to make. And then I'm in the way of my last line there. But, oh, let me see, sorry. Oh, you always have to consider the value of your milk, and that with cheese making, there is always an element of failure. Now, I don't like the word failure. I like to call this element learning experiences. But when you are spending $30 a gallon for raw milk, which I know is the case for some people, it's harder to swallow those learning experiences. So understanding that if you are purchasing your raw milk off farm, and it is a big price, that there is, some element of learning experience when learning how to make cheese. So choosing cheeses that are going to give you the most bang for your buck. For example, I would never say go out and make a cheddar if you're paying $30 a gallon for raw milk. Because cheddar is going to take 4 gallons of milk, and then you have to do all of these different steps to make it, and then you have to age it, and who knows if it's going to turn out. So I would encourage you to do some fresh cheeses, maybe dabble into some feta. That would be a really great use for a really great value for that milk. All right, and then pasteurized milk. So pasteurized milk is milk that has been heated to kill off any of the bacteria and yeasts and fungus that are within it. And there is nothing wrong with making cheese with pasteurized milk. In fact, probably most of the cheese in North America is made with pasteurized milk because it kind of takes some variables out of it. A lot of cheese makers prefer it. So if you are sourcing pasteurized milk for cheese making, you want to choose the freshest possible milk. You also need to know that you are going to need it to add in something to cheeses that are made with rennet called calcium chloride. So during the pasteurization process, the calcium content within the milk is damaged. And so we need to add that calcium back in to be able to get our milk to coagulate. The rennet requires this calcium to be able to glue the casein proteins together. So those are kind of the notes about using pasteurized milk. If you can find it, it's preferable to use non-homogenized milk that has been pasteurized for cheese making. It's really hard to find. Sometimes in the organic aisle, you can find it. If you can't find non-homogenized milk, you can use homogenized. It will be fine. It's just that the homogenization process is just this extra step that kind of takes you away from that natural process and makes it a little bit more difficult for you. So during the homogenization process, they take the milk and they blast it through like this fine sieve, and it's going to blast apart the fat globules. And so it's just a really rough treatment for milk. And anything in cheese making, we're trying to be really gentle with our milk. So sometimes it's a little bit harder to get coagulation when you're using homogenized milk, but lots of cheesemakers use it and they have good success. So just making sure that if you're using that pasteurized milk, that you're also buying that calcium chloride, which you can buy on any of the cheese supply stores that I'll talk a little bit more about later on. And then the big no-no for cheese making is ultra pasteurized milk. So this is an extra step on top of the pasteurization that has made the milk not be able to turn to cheese. So no matter what you add into it, ultra pasteurized milk has been completely rocked off the path of that natural path. You can't make cheese with it. It won't coagulate. So just knowing that if you are sourcing pasteurized milk, just to make sure that it's not ultra pasteurized. And I think the acronym for ultra pasteurized milk is UPT. That's what you would be looking for on the bottle. All right, so starter cultures. So starter cultures for cheese making are a type of bacteria known as lactic bacteria. And lactic bacteria is this big head category of bacteria that you might have heard of if you've done any other sort of fermentation. For example, if you've baked sourdough or if you've fermented vegetables, you've probably heard this term. Lactic bacteria are bacteria that like to feed on sugar, and they're named for their love of lactose, which is the sugar in milk. So in cheese making, we add in this lactic bacteria, and what it's going to do is it's going to start to feed on the lactose. And lactose sugar is a really big sugar as far as sugars go. So the lactic bacteria are going to start to feed on this lactose, and as they feed on it, they're going to ferment it into lactic acid, as well as they're going to break it into smaller sugars. So once they have finished this fermentation, other steps of fermentation can start to take hold. So later on in aging, this lactic bacteria will have set the stage for other sorts of fermentation to happen. You also may have heard of cheeses. Actually, just at the beginning of this presentation, I talked about the sweet ricotta, which is made by heating milk up and then adding in a vinegar. So you might have heard of cheeses that are made by adding in vinegar or lemon juice or citric acid. And these types of cheeses can't be aged, but they're a really great method to make different fresh types of cheeses without having to get a bunch of fancy ingredients. But just understanding that if a cheese is going to be aged, it needs to have some sort of starter culture added into it. Because when we add these acids in, those vinegar or lemon juice or citric acid, no fermentation has occurred. So those lactose sugars are still whole, and that stage has not been set for other methods of fermentation to occur later on in aging. Back to lactic bacteria. So when you're reading cheese making recipes, you're going to notice that there's basically two head categories of lactic bacteria. So the first one is mesophilic starter cultures. Now these starter cultures are low temperature loving starter cultures. And then the next one is thermophilic. So these are higher temperature loving cultures. And so different cheeses are going to have different temperature requirements during the making of them. And so we want to use starter cultures that meet these temperature requirements. For example, Parmesan is a thermophilic type cheese. So when we're making it, we're heating the curds to about 120 degrees Fahrenheit. And if we were to use a lower temperature loving culture to make this style of cheese, we would kill that culture off. So cheese making recipes are designed to be made with the types of cultures that are going to thrive in the temperatures that they're made in. Mesophilic is the most common type of culture that are most common head category. There's a bunch of just different ones underneath it, but the most common head category that you're going to find, so cheeses such as cheddar, Colby, brie, Gouda, those are all examples of cheeses that are made with mesophilic cultures. Freeze-dried starter cultures can be purchased online at any cheese supply website. In Canada, I use Glengarry Cheesemaking is my go-to, and in the United States, I recommend cheesemaking.com to people. It also runs under the name New England Cheesemaking Company. So that would be where I would be sourcing my cheese making supply ingredients. And when you look on there, there's going to be all sorts of different freeze-dried cultures. My recommendation to you is that you go on there and you buy two cultures. Buy one mesophilic and one thermophilic, and buy the ones that are going to work for the most types of cheeses that you're planning on making. So for example, when you go and look at the mesophilic type cultures, you'll see that there's a list of cheeses that it's recommended for. And if the cheeses that you plan on making hit most of those ones that it's recommended for, that would be the one that I'd buy for it. And then if I wanted to make a mesophilic type cheese and I didn't have that specific culture that I needed, I would still just use that one that I had. And then also you have the option of making natural lactic bacterial cultures. For example, clabber is something that I talk about a lot over on Instagram and YouTube and in my book. Clabber is like my passion food. I love it so much. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that on the next slide here. So clabber is basically this clabber culture. I should be more specific. Clabber culture is basically the sourdough starter of the cheese making world. So it is, clabber culture is a raw milk starter culture. We make it by taking raw milk that has that living ecology in it, and we set that raw milk out on the counter. And we let it sit out there until it coagulates, which is usually about 3 or 4 days. It's going to coagulate. And during this time, what is happening is the lactic bacteria that are naturally present within that raw milk, they're present in a very small quantity. And during this time that it's sitting out on the counter, those lactic bacteria are going to start to feed on the lactose, and they're going to start to ferment it into lactic acid. And as they feed, they're going to breed more of themselves. And eventually, when there's enough of them and they've built enough acid in that clabber culture, it's going to coagulate. So at day 3 or 4, you're going to come back and it's probably going to look something like yogurt. It might not smell great at this point. It might not look great at this point. But then you're going to take a tablespoon of that newly coagulated milk and you're going to add it to new fresh raw milk. And then you're going to let it sit out on the counter for about 12 to 24 hours. And at this point, you're going to see that it coagulates. You're then going to take a tablespoon of it, feed it to new milk, let it sit out on the counter. 24 hours later, you have coagulated milk. So this becomes your clabber culture, where you're feeding it every day and you're caring for it very similar to how you care for a sourdough starter. And if you care for it good enough and you make sure that you're feeding it every day, you're going to develop a really good colony of lactic bacteria that you can use as a cheese-making starter culture. So I love clabber. I could talk about it all day, but I won't. But if you guys want to learn more about clabber, check out my website. I teach you how to get going and get one going. Honestly, even if I didn't make cheese, if I had a good raw milk source, I would probably still keep clabber culture on my counter, just because it's such a versatile food. Like, I use it in all of my different baking. I use it as a base for dressings. I use it to like thicken sauces. So I use clabber a lot. It's I really like it. Yeah, but that's my spiel on clabber. I should say also, honestly, you can make good cheese whether you're using clabber culture or whether you're using freeze-dried culture. I kind of liken the two of them to the sourdough starter and then the dry active yeast. You know, you can make bread with either of them, and at the end of the day, you're still making bread. So both of them are going to be really good options for you. It's just about which one fits your lifestyle better. And sometimes just having another thing to feed is like not working for this stage of your life. So that's my spiel on cultures. All right. So our third ingredient is rennet. So rennet is an enzyme that causes quick coagulation in milk. And when I mean quick, I mean quite quickly. So rennet, as soon as it hits milk, it begins working, and it begins changing the structure of how casein proteins are suspended within milk. So even though we can achieve coagulation, like in the case of clabber, by using lactic bacteria alone, that process is really slow. So for example, if I was to add lactic bacteria, like a clabber culture, into my milk, it's going to take me 12 to 24 hours to get that milk to coagulate. Whereas when we add rennet into milk, we're going to see coagulation in as little as 30 minutes to an hour. So we can coagulate a giant pot of milk in a very short amount of time. And as I spoke to at the beginning of this presentation, how most cheeses start off the same, but after you've gotten that coagulation, that's when things change. That's when we start to take different paths for different types of cheeses. And so it's very important for making different types of cheeses that we coagulate our milk so that we can do different things for it with it early on in the cheese making process. For example, if we're going to be making cheddar, we're going to do the same steps as if we were making Gouda. But when we get to that coagulation point with cheddar, we're now going to be cutting the curds into about 1-inch cubes. We're going to be stirring those curds for 45 minutes. We're then going to be letting the curds rest under the whey for an hour. And then we go on to do this cheddaring process and this milling process. Whereas if we're making Gouda, we're going to be doing the same thing. We're going to be getting it to coagulation, but then we're going to be cutting the curds and we're going to be stirring them for 10 minutes. Then we're doing this separate step called washing the curds, where we're washing some of the lactose away. So it's a whole different process and allows us to make different types of cheeses. So we need to have rennet added to most of the types of cheeses that we're making so we can have that quick coagulation and take these cheeses on different journeys. So there's multiple different types of rennet available. You can find them on all the different cheese making supply websites. My favorite type of rennet to use is animal rennet, which is going to come from the fourth stomach of young ruminants. It's called chymosin, and it's going to be labeled on the cheese making websites as animal rennet. You also have the option to buy vegetable rennet, which primarily actually comes from microbial rennet. It's the same source. They're named the same thing. But traditionally, vegetable rennet came from thistles and cardoons, sorrel and nettle. There's all sorts of different vegetables that have different coagulating enzymes in them that will react with milk. And then microbial rennet is created in the lab. It's created by taking an enzyme from the mucor type mold. And so actually most vegetable rennets are labeled as microbial rennets, or made in the same way. And then there's also a genetically modified rennet that I don't have time to talk about today, but I could talk your ear off about. But it will be labeled as chymosin rennet. So when you go onto the cheese supplier website, if you see one called chymosin, it was probably created utilizing a genetically modified process. Rennet is going to come in mostly tablet or liquid form. I like liquid, I just find it the easiest to use, but tablet works fine as well. You can also have paste and powder forms that it will come in. All sorts of different forms, also all sorts of different strengths. So I recommend when you're making cheese, if you have a different strength than the recipe recommends, just go by your package directions on the rennet. And I'm often asked, is it possible to harvest your own rennet? Yes, of course it is, but it's not widely practiced anymore. The best account that I actually have of anyone harvesting their own rennet is from the children's book by Laura Ingalls Wilder, Little House in the Big Woods, where Pa goes and harvests a young calf, and then he gets rennet for 3 households, his house, his mom's, I think, and an aunt. But otherwise, you know, mostly people aren't harvesting their own rennet. Calves have to be butchered at a very young age, about 2 weeks old, to have their rennet harvested. Any older and you start getting other digestive enzymes in there that are going to interfere with the cheese making. So it's really not widely practiced, and it's pretty inexpensive on the cheese supply websites, but it's kind of interesting to know how to do it. So David Asher, he wrote The Art of Natural Cheesemaking, and in his book, he talks about how to do it. There's also a few online, like if you just Google it, you can see some online resources for it. As far as vegetable rennet goes, it's pretty, you need a lot of whatever vegetable you're using to be able to coagulate milk. So probably the most common one is thistle. And you need a lot of thistles to be able to coagulate even a gallon of milk. So it's not widely used, but it's kind of something as well that's interesting to know if that's something you're into. If you're into clabber, you're probably going to want to research this next. All right, and our last ingredient is salt. So I like to think of salt as a referee in cheese making. It's going to come in and it's going to start to regulate that fermentation of the bacteria and the funguses that is happening. Cheese making really is the decomposition of milk. So it's the breakdown of milk. And if we don't add salt in, we're basically just making fancy compost. So we want to be adding our salt in when and how the recipes ask us to, because they are the regulators of our fermentation. Choosing salts that don't have any additives is really important. So making sure that there's no anti-clumping agents, no iodine, no extra minerals. So iodines and stuff can actually interfere or even kill off your bacteria in the cheese making or your cheese making starter cultures. So I source just fine ground sea salt. You can find this usually in the canning aisle or even at the health food store, but just making sure when you buy it that it doesn't have any extra ingredients on the list, that it just says salt. All right. So equipment. As I said, you probably already have everything in your kitchen that you need to get started and make some simple cheeses, and even you could probably rig up some things to make even some more complicated cheeses. So when I started making cheese, I didn't have anything fancy. I pressed my cheese with like a stack of books, and I used a spring form pan as like my cheese form. So you can really get creative if you want to. I like to always remind people that, you know, cheese has been made for thousands of years, and it's been made in all sorts of different scenarios. You know, it's been made in the hot outback. Like, people were very resourceful with the way that they made their cheeses, and we can bring that resourcefulness into the modern age when we're making our cheeses for our family. Some of the main things that you're going to need to make cheese are going to be a thermometer. So because we are helping to regulate that fermentation of those lactic bacteria, we're needing to hit very specific temperature guidelines in our recipes. So having a good thermometer that works is going to be helpful. As long as it's been cleaned, it can be any sort of kitchen thermometer. A pot, I like to choose a pot that is obviously going to fit the amount of milk that you're processing, and also choosing a pot that's not a non-reactive material. So my favorite is like stainless steel. Sometimes I'll even use like my enameled cast iron Dutch oven, as long as it's enameled, to make cheese because it holds the warmth really well. You want to avoid aluminum. I used to actually make cheese in an aluminum pot, but cheese is very acidic, and after a while I started to see pitting inside the pot, and obviously that aluminum was leaching into my food, or into my cheese. So not a good idea you use aluminum. Actually, honestly, when I started making cheese, I didn't have a big enough pot to fit all my milk, so I used my enameled canning pot, and the temperature regulation was terrible in it, but it worked. So you really can get going without whatever you've got. Spoon, knife, measuring spoons, and cups, those are things you probably all have. I do caution, if you keep other ferments in your kitchen, to be careful about cross-contamination. So I like to use, spoons, knives, measuring spoons, and cups that are easy to clean, like stainless steel, or glass. Those are going to be really easy for you to clean and make sure that you're not cross-contaminating anything. And sometimes you will see me, like if you follow me on Instagram and stuff, you'll see me using wooden utensils for making cheese. But that's a whole other avenue of natural cheese making, because I actually only specifically use those tools for cheese making, and they're actually contribute to my cheese making starter cultures. So they have biofilms on them of the bacteria that I've used in my cheese pot, and so they're culturing the cheeses that I'm making with them. So you want to make sure that that you're not using wooden spoons, because you can develop biofilms of other sorts of things. So if you have spoons that you use for all sorts of other things, make sure that they're just stainless steel. That was a tangent, I'm sorry. Colanders. I just have a whole bunch of different sizes of colanders that I've thrifted, and I use colanders all the time in cheese making. Cheesecloth, my very favorite kind is flour sack towels from like Amazon or Walmart. They're pretty inexpensive, and they're really great cheesecloth. I caution you against buying the cheesecloth that they have at the grocery store in like the canning aisle. I think it's used for just making jelly or something, but it's terrible for cheese making. It's very fibrous, and those fibers don't do well with cheese making. So having something that's not going to leave little strings in your cheese is beneficial. Sorry, my face is in the way again. Cheese forms and press is the next one on the list there. So as I said, I used to kind of make do with what I had. Like I used a springform pan when I was getting started to form my different cheeses that I was pressing and stuff. Looking back, I did a lot of fiddling trying to figure out things that would work, when cheese forms are really not that expensive at all. Like you can get into a cheese form that's going to last you the rest of your cheese making life for like $15. So I wish I had just done that. Hindsight 2020. But what I do recommend is that you think about the cheeses that you want to make for your family, and then you buy a cheese form that will work for those types of cheeses. For example, if you want to make a lot of Gouda or pressed cheeses for your family, making sure you get a cheese form that's going to be big enough, but also have a follower lid. And a follower lid, it's just a lid that you're going to apply pressure on top of. So just kind of thinking about cheeses that you want to make for your family. One rule of thumb is that you're going to get, this is a very, very loose rule, but you're going to get about 1 pound of cheese per gallon of milk that you use. So if I was looking for a cheese form for making press stage cheese, and I was planning on mostly doing 4-gallon batches, I would be looking for a 3 to 4 pound cheese form. And on the Cheese Supplies website, it will say that. It will say this is a 3 to 4 pound cheese form, or it will say this is a 2 kilogram cheese form, something along those lines. If you're making softer cheeses, such as feta or brie, these are types of cheeses that have no pressure applied to them, so you don't need a follower lid on them, and you're often making more than one type of, or more than one cheese out of one batch. For example, if I'm going to make some brie, if I'm going to make a 2-gallon batch of brie, I'm probably going to have 4 to 6 little brie cheeses come out of that cheese pot. So we use what is called baskets. or cheese baskets is usually the word that's used for it, or you can also just use cheese forms. This is a good example in the picture of some fancy ones that I have that are made out of clay, but usually they're just like little plastic baskets. They usually come in multi-packs. You can get them on Amazon or the cheese supply store. You can also just really easily make them at home by taking a yogurt container and poking holes in it. So basically it's just a place for this cheese to drain and form into its little shapes of cheese. So yeah, kind of deciding what types of cheeses you're mostly planning on making and then buying some cheese forms to suit those needs. As far as a cheese press goes, I recommend not buying one right off the bat. You can really easily rig some up. For example, in my book, I talk about a bucket press. So that's where you take 2 5-gallon buckets and you take your cheese form with its little follower lid. Maybe you put a can or something on top of it. And then you put it in the first bucket and then you put the second bucket inside of it. And then you'll fill the bucket with like half full of water or full of water, or 3/4 full of water, however heavy of pressure you need to add onto that cheese. So that's a really great way to get started. I still use a bucket press sometimes when I'm making larger cheeses that won't fit in my designated cheese press. But as you advance and as you make more and more cheese, you're probably going to find that the bucket press is maybe not serving you as well. And then if you do want to invest in a really good press, I recommend a Dutch press. That's the type of press that I have, and I really love it. It's a great press. And then finally, just some drying racks. So I just use like a cookie sheet with a cookie rack over top of it. I also should have said on here like some Tupperware containers with little racks that fit in the bottom of them. As far as aging your cheese, I talk a lot about what is called the cheese cave, but it's just basically an area that runs at about 50 degrees Fahrenheit. So if you have like a cool cellar or a basement, or maybe a cold room that runs around this temperature, that'd be a great spot to age your cheese. You can also just age your cheese in your regular refrigerator in like the crisper, and that will work as well. Your cheeses are going to age slower. It's not as ideal, but it's a way that you can get started without having to have a bunch of having to have this fancy space for aging your cheeses. I also vacuum seal a lot of my cheeses that I'm aging. So if you have a vacuum sealer, that is a really great use for it. You can also choose to wax them, or you can choose to natural rise age them, which is a little bit more complex. But if you're trying to avoid plastics, there's also that option as well. All right, so as I said, most of my cheeses are all going to start the same way, and they're going to be starting utilizing that natural process where we're warming the milk up to about the similar temperature that it came out of the udder, and we're creating that acidic environment by utilizing fermentation, and then we're adding in that rennet, and then we're letting it sit for about an hour, and then we're coming back and we're choosing which direction we want to take our cheese into. And so this has been a really useful, it's not an invention because it's been done for thousands of years, but this has been a really useful revelation for me that a lot of different cheeses are starting in a very similar way. Because when I come in the morning, things are pretty busy. I get my milk going, I get all my things added into my pot, and I'm not really sure how my day is going to go. But when I can come back an hour later, an hour after I've had time to look at the day and see where it's going to go, then I can choose what cheeses I have time for, and really it helps me fit it into my life a lot easier.
Hey, Robyn, we have about 5 minutes.
Oh, perfect. We're on like the last slide, I think, or maybe 2 more slides.
Good.
We're almost there. Thanks, Nancy. All right. So as I said, that sweet ricotta is a really great beginner cheese. Feta cheese is also what I would call a beginner cheese, mostly because you don't need any fancy equipment or anything. You can make it with the equipment that you have in your kitchen. You don't even have to go out and buy a cheese form or anything. You can find my feta recipe on cheesefromscratch.com. Other great beginner cheeses, honestly, I tell people think about what your family's favorite cheese is and go and find a really good recipe for it, and then make that cheese over and over and over again. So I believe in all of you. I believe that you all are very capable in the kitchen. I believe that you could all go and follow a recipe. And the first time it might be a little confusing. You might have some questions. You might have to Google some things. But the second time it's going to be easier. The third time it's going to be easier. The fourth time is going to be easier. And pretty soon this is your cheese that you just know how to make. So I think that's my biggest recommendation when you're learning how to make cheese, is just pick one cheese that your family likes and make it over and over and over again. Finding recipes, I have a few on cheesefromscratch.com, especially clabber. I talk a lot about clabber over there. So if you want to get a clabber culture going, that's a great spot to go. Cheesemaking.com is that cheese supply website that I mentioned. They have a ton of recipes on there. And the good thing about their website is that you can read underneath and read the reviews about what other people are saying and stuff, because there is bad cheese recipes out there. It's a bit of a science, and sometimes the recipes don't always follow the science, which kind of sets you up for failure from the start. But cheesemaking.com has some really good recipes. Gavin Weber or Cheese52 on YouTube, they're really good resources. I'm also on YouTube and I have some tutorials over there. Some books that I recommend: David Asher's The Art of Natural Cheesemaking. He also has a second book that is a beast, but if you're interested in natural cheesemaking, it's a really good book. Deborah Amron Boy's 200 Easy Homemade Cheese Recipes. That's the first recipe book I ever had, and it was a really good one. And then I also have my own cheesemaking book, so Cheese from Scratch, Natural Cheesemaking from Home. And I talk about freeze-dried cultures in there as well as clabber culture. So I give you two different options to go with. So I know we covered a lot of information here today, but remember that cheese making can be as simple or as complex as you want it to be. So the day that I die, I will still have more to learn about cheese making, but the cool thing is that the day that I learned to make cheese, I made good cheese. So really, it will meet you where you're at, and the best way to learn how to make cheese is to just get started. And our conclusion. So thank you guys so much for coming to this presentation and listening to me ramble about this. You can follow along with me at Cheese from Scratch on Instagram. I'm also on Facebook, and I just figured out how to link my posts so that you can, if you're not on Instagram, you can see everything I put on there. I also have more information on my website and then in my cheesemaking book, as I've already talked about. So you can buy my book through my publisher, homesteadliving.com, or through Amazon. Yeah, and thank you guys so much for having me. I think it's question time.
Yes, it is. Okay, I'm trying to get my camera up. So I think you should stop sharing your presentation, Robyn. There we go.
There we go.
Okay, so let's do some quick fire rapid questions. You were on a roll and I didn't want to interrupt you. So,
oh, no. Sorry.
Bonnie asked, any recommendations for people who are intolerant to whey or casein in cow's milk?
Ooh, that's it's tricky because it depends what your allergy actually is. Like if it's lactose, then I would recommend to people make more aged cheeses because the lactose is going to be fermented out. If it's actually casein, that's a trickier one because the whole cheese is casein protein. So it really depends on your allergy. There's different types of proteins that you can have in milk too that aren't the casein proteins, but the A1 and A2, I would maybe look into that kind of stuff, but I can't speak to it too much, not knowing like the background of your allergies, but cheese is casein protein, so that really makes it a hard one. But actually there's a for as far as like vegetable cheeses go, I don't know anything about making plant-based cheeses, but there is a book by Claudia, I can't remember her name. You'll find it as soon as you Google it on Amazon, and she has a book for plant-based cheeses.
Very interesting. Yeah. Okay, and then have you ever heard of Yesterday's cheese? Somebody said that they make Yesterday's cheese. Is that like farmer's cheese?
I think it's like a very quick type cheese. Hey, it's like a pressed cheese, but you can eat it you make it yesterday and you can make it today. That's what I always think about it. Tracy from Cheese Need. She has a cheese supply website, and she also runs the Facebook page Learn to Make Cheese. She has yesterday's recipe, and I think she has it on YouTube, maybe her tutorial for it. I've never made it before, but.
And then I had some questions on the homogenized milk, and you covered that. And you went over some ways to save money and start cheese making on a budget. So that was good. That answered some of those questions. Another one, Beth asked, which types of cheeses are good for your gut microbiome due to the beneficial bacteria in them?
Yeah, so any of the ones that utilize fermentation, the ones that are made with like an acid, like a vinegar, lemon juice, or citric acid, as I talked about, they don't go through fermentation. So they're not like, other than maybe the few raw milk bacteria, if you're making it with raw milk, they're not going to be loaded with the bacteria like other cheeses. For example, any cheese that's going to be aged, most fresh cheeses that are made, all fresh cheeses that are made by utilizing starter culture bacteria, those are all going to be really good for your gut.
I like how you kind of related the mesophilic and thermophilic freeze-dried cultures to active dry yeast versus clabber as sourdough starter. That made it like very clear for me to kind of differentiate between the two.
Yeah, exactly. No, that's kind of how I think about it too. And sometimes I still, even though I mostly make with clabber, sometimes I still reach for the freeze-dried ones, because you store them in your freezer. They're good for years. And if I forget to feed my clabber culture the day before, it's like a nice thing to have on hand, that you can still make cheese that day.
Mm-hmm. So what is the longest you've aged a cheese?
2 years. I think is that I've had some parmesans that are 2 years. It's pretty hard to make long aged cheeses in the home setting, but the biggest candidates for them are those thermophilic type cheeses, where we're cooking them to high heat and they're getting a lot drier, and there's less opportunity for when there's less moisture. There's less opportunity for things to go wrong during the aging process. But yeah, I've made a couple of parmesans that are like 2 years old.
That's interesting. I never,
Yeah.
It's like I think of Parmesan cheese and I just think of Italy and these big storehouses and, the Parmigiano Reggiano, and it doesn't seem like it would be something that I could achieve at my home.
Yeah, well, it's definitely a little bit different, but you can make something that is very, very similar to Parmesan. And I don't really we have to use cheese names, like we have to use cheddar and we have to use Parmesan, because that's how we relate to these cheeses, but they're really not truly that. These cheeses, they come from geographical areas, and the different bacteria that make them are native to those areas and stuff. So we're really just kind of making copycats of these types of cheeses.
Mm-hmm.
The sizes of the cheeses, they're really contributing to the way that they age, but we do our best. And I think that we should all know that we can make amazing cheese at home, because you shouldn't be settling for subpar cheese. You can make amazing cheese at home.
That's your new shirt. Don't settle for subpar cheese.
Yeah.
Make it yourself.
Today, actually, on Instagram, I showed like this review of this bad cheese that I made, and somebody asked if I just force myself to eat it or if I feed it to my pigs, and I was like, oh, of course I feed it to the pigs. I'm not just going to eat bad cheese.
Yeah. Like, why? I have all this cheese.
I'm not going to torture myself that way.
So one last quick question. What rennet do you you already talked about what rennet you suggest, but I guess one of our chapters had a long discussion about commercially bought cheese that doesn't use GMO or Pfizer rennet.
Yeah.
Do you know anything about that?
Yeah, I just did a podcast with Michelle from Soul Rested. You can have a listen to that podcast, and if you can't find it, I think her podcast name is Simple Doesn't, I don't know. Soul Rested is her Instagram handle, but if you can't find it, you can email me at cheesefromscratch, and I'll at outlook.com, and I'll send you the podcast link. But we just had a big long discussion about it, and it was really interesting. But basically, if you're on the cheese supply website, you're going to have all these different types of rennet that I talked about, but the ones that are labeled chymosin rennet, those are usually the genetically genetically modified ones. And the tricky part about it is that in their, sorry, the dogs are going crazy in the background. In the description of it, it will say this is not a genetically modified organism, or like this is not a GMO product. And the way they can get away with that is because it's an enzyme, it's not an organism. So it's created using a genetically modified process. They genetically modify E. coli bacteria to produce the chymosin enzyme, which is the same enzyme that's in the lining of the calves' stomachs. And then these E. coli bacteria produce that enzyme. They kill off the E. coli and purify it out, and then they're left with this pure chymosin. So anytime you're seeing pure chymosin, it was created during using a genetically modified process. Animal rennet also has chymosin in it, but it usually has a few other digestive enzymes in it, and it will say animal derived.
Are a lot of the big commercial processed cheese using the GMO type?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, they definitely are. It's the cheapest. It's the most widely available, and I have so many feelings on it, too many to share. But we kind of need it. Like we in North America, I don't believe, it's really hard to get to the bottom of it, but I don't actually believe we're making our own rennet. I think that all of our rennet is being imported from other countries, all of our animal rennet. So this is the only type of rennet we actually have the capacity to make all of the different types of cheeses in North America. Yeah, so yeah, it's a big topic, but yeah, I talked about it in that podcast. Sorry, the dogs are going like insane in the background. But, yeah.
Well, Robyn, I on behalf of all of the ladies at NLHG across the United States and all of our different chapters, we are so excited that you joined us. Thank you so much for just the wealth of information and sharing your time with us, and such a beautiful presentation. You really covered so many different topics. And again, I can't recommend your book highly enough. I was just looking at it when you were presenting. It's like it's over 300 pages, and it really covers everything that you talked about in more detail, provides a ton of recipes. So it's great. And I just, again, thank you so much.
Oh, thank you guys for having me. It's always a pleasure.
And so go check out Robyn on her Instagram account. The link is in the chat. I will put everything in our VIP vault as well. And then you were going to send me your presentation for us to put a copy of that in there?
Well, as soon as I get off, I'll send it to you.
Okay, great. And then next month, our national virtual gathering is on March 4th, and we have Mindy Wood from Our Inspired Roots, and she's going to be talking about designing your permaculture zone 1 space for maximum ease and abundance. So how to do your garden right outside your front door so it's always there, it's super accessible, and you can have an abundant garden. So anyway, thanks again, Robyn. Thank you, everyone who joined tonight, and we will see you next month. Bye.
Thanks. Bye. Bye, everybody.